Hey guys, So hey guys, welcome back to RN 203. So today mostly we'll be covering about navigation. So like in React Native, there are three main pillars of how you build apps. The first one would be basic, basic React Native, like how web and React Native compare. So you need to know how styling and stuff like that works. So that is what we covered in the first session. In the second session, we covered how do you render list. Basically, how do you list a lot of stuff on the screen and make sure that performance is not hampered, right? That we learned in flat list, section list, and stuff like that. Scroll view, how do you get scroll bars and stuff like that, right? Now, the third most important piece of building a complete React Native app would be navigation, because without navigation you can't build production ready apps. Cool. So this session would be totally focused on navigation only, nothing else, right? So let's just start. uh, I'll share my screen. Mhm. uh, yeah, I think, is my screen visible now? Yeah. uh, so again, the agenda today would be discussing stack, tab, and rower navigation. So these are three types of navigation in React Native: stack, tab, and rower. So we'll basically look into this. This is what our agenda for today is. So before we start going in deep into navigation, let me just tell you briefly what navigation is. Also, you have done it in web using anchor tag and href and stuff like that, right? So that's the same thing in React Native, but there are certain differences on how web navigates and how React Native would navigate. So before that, I'll just spend a brief minute talking about navigation. So navigation, what I'm talking about is in respect with mobile applications, right? So React Native applications, like mobile applications, generally make use of all types of available navigation. So
Hey,
stack.
hey, Mash, your screen is not visible.
My screen is not visible. Okay. Oh, sorry. Only what not sure why. Uh, okay. I'm getting stop sharing option, but I'm not sure. Is this visible now? Let me rejoin and check once. Yeah. Swapnil, I'm getting host as disabled screen sharing now. Mm, okay. It's allowing me to share a tab, but not the entire screen. Yeah. Okay. For now. Okay. Let's continue like this for now. It's allowing me to share a tab, but not my whole screen. Okay, so anyways, I was talking about navigation, right? So navigation is basically three types in React Native, and we are going to use all three of them. So to build production application, you typically use all of them. In the web, the old page, like the old component, is unmounted from your memory, and then the new one is mounted. This may or may not be the case in mobile navigation, right? So this is what I've said over here. In web, the old page gets unmounted from memory and regenerate when we navigate back to the old page. So suppose you are on a page A and then you move to page B. So the memory occupied by space A. So the memory means the memory in RAM, that is flushed and cleaned, and then yeah, that's it. When you navigate back, that page is regenerated from scratch. In the mobile world, this may or may not be true. This is typically false for many cases unless you explicitly do replace and stuff like that, right? Which usually we don't do. Okay, so before going into stack navigation, I would like to talk about stack, right? So stack is basically your abstract data structure. Like you would have heard about it, stack, heap, and stuff like that, right? This is the same data structure that is used to implement stack. Basically, it has three operations: push, pop, and top. So you can think of stack as basically a container in which you can only access the topmost element. So push is basically you push a new element into that container. Like I have an empty container, then I'll push an element A, then I'll push an element B. So B will come on top of A. Now, when I pop, the topmost element will get removed, because with stack, I can only access the topmost element. Whatever the elements are below it, we do not care, because we are only accessing and manipulating the top one. So when you basically push an element, it goes on the top because currently the container is empty. Then you push one more, so that comes on top. So A, B, C, D. When you start popping, you basically remove the element from the container. So you can think of when you pop, okay, and you can't pop the middle element. You always pop the top element because stack works that way. Like this is how we are thinking about the data structure. So this is how basically we think about stack. I think this is something you should know already. Just a quick revision on for it, right? Yeah, so let's start with stack navigator. So this is like the most important navigation. So what happens is there are three types of navigation, as I already told: stack, tab, and drawer. So drawer is basically a mixture of stack and tab, and tab is usually multiple stacks. So the most basic unit of navigation is stack, right? So we'll get to drawer, tab later on, but for now, just focus on stack, because if you understand this, the other two navigations are very simple. Okay. So what I mean by stack navigator is, as I said, that stack, right? It's the same implementation, but instead of pushing some A, B, C, D, we're pushing screens. That's the only difference. So the stack navigator pushes the new screen on top of the old one. So like I said, we had a container, right? We were pushing ABCD. Now instead of pushing ABCD, we're pushing screens, right? So the old, okay, somewhere you might find page, you might find screen, but I typically stick to screen to keep it consistent. But if you find page written somewhere, it's the same as screen. Okay. So the stack navigator pushes the new screen on top of the old one, same as stack. So this is effectively a push. The old screen doesn't get unmounted and continues to exist. So now you have two screens: a screen that is below and screen that is above, because we are pushing on top of stack, right? So compare this to the web. If you push a screen, what would happen is the old one typically gets unmounted from memory, and then you generate the new page for the web. In the app, this is not how you work, right? How you work is you basically push the new screen on top of the old one. So the old one is still occupying the memory, as well as the new one now occupies memory. Okay. So when user navigates back to this screen, like the old screen, right? So there is a screen A, then you push the screen B on top of it. Now you're going back to screen by pressing the back button on your phone. So hardware back button is there, right? Or you press back somewhere. So what happens is this new screen, the B screen, is popped from the stack, and then you go to the old one, and you find the old screen as you left it. Why is this happening? Because you do, like, you are not removing the old screen from the memory, right? So you find that screen as it is. So a quick demo would be over here. Uh, yeah. So you can see this is basically stack navigation. So they're pushing something on top of this, and then they're going back. Right. So they are finding the screen as it is. So this is what I mean by stack navigation. So this new screen is overlaid on top of the old one. Okay. Yeah, this is what I wanted to say about stack. So any questions about this? Okay. All clear. Cool. The second one is okay. Uh, will there be any performance issues? Usually, no. Usually you don't have any performance issues because you are using native stuff, right? So apps are usually well equipped to handle that sort of load. That's why you see when you download apps you get huge apps with 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 megabytes of this, and then they occupy a lot of RAM, right? Because you need to keep a lot of stuff in memory. So performance issues, it could exist, but uh, basically native apps are more equipped to handle this sort of load rather than web. If you do this sort of stuff in the web, it will be very heavy, but in native you can get away with this. That's why it really doesn't feel that big of a hassle now. Okay. So now let's get back to stack. I've discussed stack. Now the second is tab. So tab is something I'll show first. Yeah. So this is tab navigation. You can see this bottom uh, part, right? So in the Instagram also you have this 4 5 icons, right? So these are basically tab navigators. So you navigate from one screen to another using this bottom tab. So this is what I mean by tab. So basically, essentially, there are two type of tab navigators. So one is a bottom, one is a top. Their functionality is exactly the same. Just because the placement changes, we have made two names. But when I say tab, I mean both of them, because as implementers it doesn't really feel much different, because only the position will change. Either it will be at the bottom or it will be at the top, right? So this is bottom tab. On top tab the tabs would be here instead of here. That's the only difference. So functionality wise, tab navigators are not different. Okay. So tabs are usually independent screens at the top or bottom of the screen. So you have something like home, settings, notification, etc. Now these screens are not usually linked. They are not directly linked, but they are logically linked for the app. So this is when we use tab navigators. So each tab usually has a layer of stack associated with it, right? So we saw home and settings, right? So setting screen will have a stack navigator associated to it, and home will have a stack navigator associated to it. So you can essentially think of tabs as your containers, right? What I said was stack navigation mein ki you have containers and you push screens, right? You can think of those containers present in the tab. So home will have one container, settings will have one container. When you push elements, they will go into their respective tab, right? So this is how you think of tab navigators. So tab is basically your broad general part, and then you have specific screens inside that tab. Okay. Also, tabs do not reset when you select a different tab. So you can go from home to settings, but again, as I said, like there are three or four different stack navigators, right? So they don't really change. So this is what is tab navigator. So when you move from one screen to other, like from here to here, sorry, yeah, from article to chart or something like that, this is basically tab navigation. So you can see this like state doesn't really change much, because again these are four separates tags that are in memory. Cool. Yeah. So any doubts in tab navigation? Okay. So the last one is drawer navigation. So drawer navigation is like it's actually just a combination of stack and tab. It's nothing new, right? I'll just share my this. Hmm. For some reason, like it's not allowing me to share my whole screen. Hmm. Okay. Uh, okay. Now I'll just uh, talk briefly about drawer navigation. So drawer is basically your side navigation. So you would have definitely seen stuff like this. So you can see the side drawer, right? So this is called drawer navigation. So this essentially is just a container for other screens. So drawer navigation in itself is nothing, right? It is a combination of stack or tab. So when you click on this, you either navigate to some screen on some stack or you navigate it to some other tab. That's it. So drawer is nothing. It's just a layout. Cool. So this is basically what drawer is. So it is basically a side screen drawer. This generally links to a stack or a tab navigator. Right. So you don't need to worry like drawer is something new. If you know stack, you effectively know tab and you effectively know drawer. Right. So this is like the logical hierarchy. Yeah. So I'll just wrap the theory up. So navigation mein there is some cheat code like what I feel is so basically stack navigators are used when you want to follow a sequence of events. If you want screens to be linked, like if you think about WhatsApp, right? So you go to home, you see a list of chats. Then when you click on that chat, you see chat details, right? So that chat details and chat screen are logically linked. So we use stack when you want to follow a sequence of events. So that chat detail screen doesn't make sense on its own, right? It needs like the user needs to know what chat details is this, right? So that's why when you want to follow a sequence of events, you use stack. When do you use tabs? Tabs are when you want to switch around between different unrelated sections of your application. So home and settings have nothing to do with each other. So those are separate tabs. But in settings, you can have multiple settings, and those are logically linked. So all the settings would be in a stack navigator because they are logically linked and they follow a sequence, right? Drawer is basically for a convenience. So like the user can swipe and go to any part of the app. This is basically convenience. It is nothing else, right? The library we'll use to implement them is React navigation. Okay, so this is what we'll use. Yeah. So any questions until now? Okay, so we can start implementing the code now. So one last thing before we start. So if you look at Stack navigators, right? So this is what we'll start by implementing. Also, this is the library, like React navigation, right? This is the docs. Okay, I'm using Expo, and I have already done the setup. So if you want, you can just like how do you set up, you can go to this docs over here, they'll tell you like run this code and like whatever the setup is, just do it. Okay. If you're using bare React Native, you would have to mess with Java and Kotlin files, but since we are using Expo, we do not care about this, right? What we'll do is we'll just run this npx expo, install this, and yarn add this, and we are good to go, right? We just need to set up the navigation container. That's it. So that's why I'm using Expo. I do not want to mess with this file, and basically the setup is a bit of a mess when you're using React Native. So that's why I'm using Expo. Okay. So, anyways, I'll come back to the point. There are two stack navigators in React navigation, right? So these are basically the implementation of the concept of stack navigator. So there you have a React Native stack and React navigation native stack. The difference is this: the first one, just the stack one, is a JS implementation. So if you think about it logically, it is a JS implementation, meaning it will be implemented in JavaScript, which means uh, it will be slower than your native stack, right? Because you need to convert the JavaScript, like you don't convert the JavaScript to native code. You basically use JavaScript to call the native code, right? So that's why it is a bit slower than the native stack. But since we're in JavaScript, it is highly customizable. So we'll use this stack, right? Because it is basically built in JavaScript. Again, if you use native stack also, you will write JavaScript code. No way you are writing Java Objective C. But the thing is, the implementation is heavier on the JS side for this stack. Implementation is heavier on the native side for this version of that stack, right? So this like it's just the implementation differs. So if you're using JS implementation, it will be more what do you say, customizable. So you can add heavy like custom animations and stuff like that. But if you're using native stack, the thing is it is not as customizable as JS. But since this is native, like you'll obviously get better performance than JS implementation. So what React navigation doc suggests and what I also suggest is you start with the normal stack, and if you feel your app has performance issues, then switch to this. But like I have never switched from this to this. Like native stack is something I've never used. Why? Because I didn't get any performance issues up till now. So this is a pretty good implementation and it is much more customizable. So might as well go with this. Right. So this is what I suggest. So I'll set up this React navigation stack. I'll start with the code. Right. Yeah. Uh, okay. So so is the like emulator also visible or not? Nothing is visible right now. Okay. Try desktop app. I do not have a desktop as certainly. Uh, mm, okay, I'll do that. Mm, Okay. Is the whole screen visible now? Yeah, I think. Yeah. Yeah, finally. Okay. So, so I'll start with the code. I'll get rid of this. Run. Okay. So what I've done is I've basically set up the navigators, right? And I have some dummy screens. So I'll just start with what the screens is. Okay, and to like do installation and stuff like that, I would prefer you do that on your own, because if I start doing that, like the session will go on for too long. So what I've done is I have set up all types of navigators, like drawer, stack, and tab. We'll look at this individually. So first I'll start with screens, right? So I have basically three screens. These screens are dummy screens, like there is no heavy logic in them. It's just it has home. This is your home screen. And I have a notification screen. Here I have written notification. And then there is a setting screen in which I have written setting. That's it. Like this is a very basic implementation of a screen or a React component, right? Okay. So now what I need to do is in the app.js, for you to run any uh, navigation, right? So you need to basically import this navigation container, and then you put your navigation inside this, right? So if you go to the docs too and read the documentation, what they say is you have a navigation container, and then you set up different navigators inside this. So for now, what I've done is I've set up the navigation container, and then I have added a stack navigator, right? So inside the stack navigator, you can see this is where I'm registering my screens. Cool. So there is a create stack navigator that is given by this library. So I'm creating this stack, and then stack.navigator, and inside this I'm setting up my screens. So think of this as registering your screens, right? Your app needs to know what screen is there. So these are required props. So you need, each screen has a unique name, and it should point to a component. This component may or may not be unique. Unique name because like this name is what we'll use to navigate to this screen. So if you want to go to this component, you need to write this name. If you want to go to this component, you need to write this name. Right. So this name is how we are uniquely identifying what screen we want to navigate to. Okay. Yeah. So this is my home screen. Right. Now, basically, the first screen that is there in the navigator is rendered. So since home is on top, home is rendered. If I put this on top, right, uh, and reload, so notification should render. So it's basically this, right? So now notification has rendered. Why? Because the one at the top is rendered by default. What you can do is like there is something called initial route name, and then you can set this to home. So even though home is below, that will be rendered. So there are some basic props like this from which you can manipulate the navigator, but like there is nothing too much to worry about over here. So this is basic registration. So any confusion over here? Okay, so now what we have done is we have created a stack navigator and registered our components, right? So now what I need to do is navigate from home to notification or notification to home and stuff like that. Correct. Okay, before that, one last thing. This home, right? Where is this coming from? If you look at my implementation of home, like there is nothing like this, right? If I return null from here, return null, right? So now you can see like this home is still there. How is this coming? This is coming from React navigation, right? So React navigation by default will put the screen name and stuff like that. If you want, you can keep it. I don't like it, so I'll remove it basically. So how will I remove this? I'll add screen options and then say uh, header shown or something like that. Yeah, header shown to false. If I do this, you can see that goes away, right? So React navigation, you can think of it as basically a component. It gives you a lot of stuff on top of your screen. You can see home was my screen. It gave me home screen, that is true, but it also gave me header. It will give me some other props. So all these navigators, you need to think of them as UI plus some functionality. They're basically React components. So it has some UI associated. It will also add some functionality to each screen. Right. Okay. So before, yeah. So now I think I can start implementing what I wanted to show, like how do you navigate to screens, right? So here what I'll do is, so since this is a home screen, right, and I'm using React navigation, so React navigation by default would give you two, three stuff. Like it gives you, let me just go. Yeah, tab and drawer. I'll just uh, basically, okay, I think, okay, I think I missed a slide over here somewhere. I'll add the slide later on. Okay, so what happens is, since I'm wrapping this in React navigation, there are two things it gives me. It gives me a route and it gives me a navigation, right? So for now, route is of no use to us. What's important to us is this navigation prop. Now, where is this prop coming from? This prop is provided to all your screens that are registered in this navigation, right? So um, like any screen that is there inside stack, tab, drawer, or whatever, it will get these props on its own. You do not need to set up stuff. By default, you will just get them, right? So what I'll do is, now I can actually navigate to other screens. So what I'll do is, I'll add a touchable opacity and I'll add navigation. Touchable opacity. And what I'll do is touchable opacity, style text. I'll say navigate to notification or something like that, right? So I'm setting up my basically pressable or something which I can click and navigate to, right? So handle press something like this. So what I'll do is on press, I'll just console.log for now, pressed, right? And then here on press is handle press. So if I look at this, so you can see pressed and something, this comes up, right? So now what I'll do is navigation dot navigate. So now I have like a lot of options over here. So navigation dot, like I have a lot of options on what I want to do. I can do navigate, I can do push, I can do pop and stuff like that, right? So this is what I've explained over here. Okay. So navigation dot whatever options I have, like the main ones I've shown here, the other options you can look into them through the docs. So the most important thing is push and navigate. Usually this is what you'll be using. You'll be using pop also sometimes. Replace is something we don't really use. So I'll just show you push and pop for now. I'll tell you what navigate and replace does later on. So push is the simplest one. Like I said, it will push a screen on top of the stack, right? So what screen do I want to navigate to? I want to navigate to home, right? So if I do this and then click on this, nothing happens. Okay, navigation dot. I'll just console.log navigation. Console.log. Is this the? Yeah, add listener, can go back, dispatch. Yeah, this is the correct one. Is the name correct? Stack, home, yeah, home seems to be fine. Oh, sorry, not navigate. Yeah, I wanted to do push, right? Push. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Uh, okay, what's happening is I'm on home screen, right? This is like the code I'm writing is like this screen is wrong. So I'll just comment this out. See, I'm on home screen, right? I'm trying to navigate to home screen again, and I'm pushing home screen on top of it. That's why this same UI is coming, right? But what I want is I do not want to navigate from home to home. I want to navigate from home to let's say notification, right? So this should be over here. Yeah, you can see notification came up, right? So this is how this works. If you click on this, notification and back, notification and back, right? So this is how you can link screens. Let's suppose I'm pushing a screen that is not there, something like settings, right? Now, if you look at the Stack Navigator, there's no setting screens over here, right? What will happen? Like crash, right? Like you don't have that screen. How will it navigate? You can see this was not handled by any navigator. Do you have a screen name? Whatever, whatever, right? So basically, you don't have that screen in that particular navigator, so you can't navigate to it. Makes sense, right? You haven't registered that screen over here. If you want to go to the settings screens from this, you need to register it over here. Stack.screen, name is settings, and then you need to pass the component. I need to import that screen. Import settings. Oh, sorry. Do I have a settings screen? Yes, I have settings. Settings from the screen slash settings. Right. I need to add settings over here. And now I think you can go to settings. Right. So now you can go to settings. Cool enough. Is there any doubt over here? Yeah. That's what I was navigating to home. Right. Okay. So now, one more thing. Like, if I'm on home and I press back, like, it isn't going anywhere, right? Because there is no previous screen to go back to. So pressing back on home will do nothing because home is my initial screen. From there, I have pushed navigation on top. From there, I have pushed settings on top. And then I go back to home. But from home, I can't go back because there is no previous screen to go back to. Right. So this is how this is working. You can link screens using navigate.push, and okay, you can also do navigate like this, right? So now if I go to this and then I press back, it is essentially working the same, right? So you can use this and you can use navigate, but navigate, what it does is it replaces the screen also, right? It will replace a current top route with a given route, right? So this is what navigate is doing. So it replaces stack, effectively pushes, right? So if I reload this app, so usually you will use something like stack, and then basically navigate is something you don't usually use, but this can be used to replace this. So I don't usually use navigate. What I do is basically, what's the use case of navigate? Navigate basically means you want to effectively block the user from accessing the screen again, right? If you are from login you go to some other screen, and then you don't want your user to go from home back to login. So in those cases you use navigate, but this sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work. What 100% what works 100% of the time for me is you navigate from home to login. You navigate from login to home screen, and then you reset the stack. So there is, I think, another thing called navigation dot reset or something like this, right? Reset screen. So now, okay, cannot lead. Okay, there is a reset function somewhere, like reset React navigation. If you search, you'll get this navigation access, right? So this is reset. So this is what I prefer instead of navigate and stuff like that. So the most important thing is push, and then pop is basically when you press the back button, it automatically pops the screen, right? So this is what this. So navigate will pop back to the earlier in the stack if the route is already present. So basically, it is similar to reset, but reset is much more reliable rather than navigate. So basically, what it's saying is, suppose you have three screens, four screens, right? So if that screen is there in the stack, it will pop back to it if that name is already present over here. So this is like how this was working. Yeah, so this is pretty much it for how do you navigate to screens. So any doubts over here? I'll just get rid of, I'll just add push again. Okay, sorry. Okay, and I'll also show replace. Replace. Yeah, so if you go to this, you can't go back, right? Because you replace that element with the setting screen. So there was a home screen. So if you push settings on top of it, it goes on top of it. Now I'm replacing it with settings. So the home was popped and settings were pushed, right? So this is what replace does. I typically don't use replace. I typically don't use navigate. I just use push, pop, and if I want to reset the stack, then there is a reset. That's it. So replace will replace the route. Navigate will pop back to the earliest stack if the name is present. That's it. Okay. Yeah. Any questions over here? Okay. Cool. So now the next thing is if you want to take some data from one screen to another, right? So navigation, typically what happens is you don't want to navigate to that screen. You want to take some data from this screen and pass it to the other screen, right? So here what you do is there is a second option over here which you can pass. Okay. So let's suppose you do not know how do you pass data to screens, right? So what you can do is React navigation navigate with some params, right? With params. If you search this, you will see. So the docs are pretty good of React navigation, is what I feel. So you can see we were using this navigation prop, right? So where did this come from? This was given to us by React navigation. It comes to all your screens on its own. Now, like I said, you can pass an object and you can pass the params, right? So this is what we'll do. So we can pass some params like um, test hello world, right? So this is what I'm passing from your home to the setting screen, right? So if I go to, or basically instead of doing, yeah, let's just do this for now. So I'll just kill the app and restart it. Okay. Yeah. So while it loads, basically what I'm doing is I'm passing this data. So you can think of these params as your URL params, right? Here, one thing I would like to show is you can pass in functions too. For example, don't do this, right? Like literally, please don't do this, but this is something you can do. I just wanted to show you that. So console.log function from, let's say, home, right? Right. So I can pass this function too. Now I'm passing this to the setting screen, right? So whatever this object is, it is passed to your settings screen. Right. So if I click on this and I go to settings, nothing happened because obviously you're passing data, but you're not reading that data. And one more thing happened is non-serializable values are found in navigation state. Check this, right? So if you read through stuff like this, what it basically says is you should not pass functions and stuff like that. These params, think about them as your URL params. So in URL params, do you pass functions? No. What you do is you pass in text and stuff like that, like some ID, some metadata and stuff like that, right? So this object, you need to think of it as your URL param. So you pass in test ID, some name, some other information, right? You can pass functions, but don't do this. Why? Because this is not serializable. This will work if your app doesn't have any sort of notification. Now think of this as if there was a notification you want to link to setting screen. So suppose you sent a notification, and when you click on that notification, you want to open the setting screen. Now, in that case, how would you pass this function? Right. So that's what is saying, like this is non-serializable. We as React navigation, we can do that, but this is not something you should do. Right. So you would see a lot of code bases doing this. This is a really bad practice. Please do not do this because later on you would have to refactor a hell lot of it. Because you, when you do stuff like deep linking and stuff like that, this would fail. You don't pass functions from one screen to another. But anyways, this is how you pass data. I'll show you this works. How? By going to the settings screen. So like I said, every screen gets two things, route and navigation, right? So here I'll show you what route exactly is. So console.log. So if you see route.params, right? So here, if I go back, okay. Uh, okay, so whenever you pass this object, right? So you can read from it using route.params. Cool. So if I go to the screen, okay, yeah, you can see this log. Don't do this. This is a function, and then there is a test hello world. So what I can do is I can get the text from home using route dot params dot. So this is the object you passed. Route dot params is exactly the object you passed, right? So what object did I pass? In that there is a field called test. So that field would be over here. This is the text from home. So instead of rendering this settings, what I'll do is I'll render this text from home. One thing, and second thing is I can have that function too, right? So you can use the function like function from home is route dot params dot the field name is don't do this, so this would be over here, right? And then basically you can call this functions from here too. Function from home, I can call it. Yeah, so you can see function from home is running, right? I've passed the function here, but I've executed it here. So this is how you can use route. So again, this is just a JavaScript object, so you can pass anything, but uh, try to pass JSON serializable data only. If you JSON dot pass this, this would not work properly. So this is what they mean by JSON serializable, like non-serializable and JSON serializable. So basically anything that can be passed in JSON is what you should prefer passing over here. Also, don't pass a lot of data like lists and stuff like that. It's better to pass the ID and let the settings page refetch it instead of doing it like this. Right? Okay. Okay. Why is this text from home not rendering? let me just console.log text from home. Okay, this is undefined. Route dot. Okay, sorry, this should be params. Yeah, route dot params dot test, not route dot param. That's it. Okay. Yeah. So this is how this would work. Oh, not again. Okay, I'm not sure why this is misbehaving. Basically, it's losing the connection to Expo. Anyway, so you guys have any doubt until now? Okay, so let's just recap. Navigation, you use that to navigate to other screens. How do you pass data? So navigation takes in two things. One, the first thing it takes is your screen name, what screen you want to go to. The second thing that it takes is some props, right? So if you want to pass data from one screen to other, you use the second param and you pass them as an object. How do you read data on the current screen? Like if you pass some data from screen A to screen B, how do you read that data on screen B? You use route.params, right? So route.params has the exact object that was sent to it. So you can read that. So this is how you link screens and read data, right? Okay, so this was effectively all the basic knowledge about Stack Navigator. I'll quickly show you Tab Navigator and Drawer Navigator, right? So this was Stack. Now what? I'll just commit this once. Uh, uh, let's send linking to home and settings. Right. Okay. So what you have learned for Stack, right, is the same thing for like this is applicable everywhere. But usually when you do tab navigation, you don't pass data. Okay, before that, this is how you set up a tab navigator. So I'm creating a bottom tab. This could be a create top tab navigator, but usually apps go with bottom tab, so that's what I've chosen. So you can create a bottom tab navigator and then you register your screens, right? So now instead of rendering that stack inside your this, what I'll do is I'll import tab navigator, and instead of rendering the stack navigator, I'll render the tab navigator, right? So this is how it is working, right? So now I have two screens, settings and home, right? You can see these two. So this is my tab navigator. Again, this header stuff is something I do not like. So the same thing, you can do screen options. Here header shown would be header. Okay, you can customize the header too, but header shown, sorry, header shown should be false because I don't want any sort of header, right? So yeah, now you can see. Okay, so it basically needs some icon. Since I'm not giving it any icon, this is I think the default stuff you're getting. And the setting screen has nothing in it because when I navigate from one tab to another, I'm not passing data, right? So that's why this is how it is working. If you look at the setting screen, so instead of doing this, I can do settings over here, settings, and now it would render settings, right? Home and settings. So this is your bottom tab navigator. Is pretty much the same thing. Yeah, and if you search on like how to pass data from something like bottom tab navigator, like this is something typically you don't do. I've never done this, but uh, Passing data. So basically, what you can do is you can have something like initial profs or something of that sort over here. So I think initial params. Yeah. So using this, you can pass some initial data to those screens. So like I was saying, right? We were settings was showing an empty screen. Correct. Why? Because we weren't passing any data. So you can actually pass initial params to it. So initial params, something like test hello world. So hello world. So you can do this too. So this is the initial params that was passed to it, and then text from home. Yeah, this should work. Sorry, reload. Yeah, yeah. So you can see hello world. Why? Because I've passed the params through this. Right. So this is how you can pass params at the screen level. So if you don't pass any params, these will be picked. And if you pass some params, the params you passed will obviously be picked. So this is like your default initial params. Right. Okay. This is your bottom tab navigator. So you can navigate to different parts of your screen. Here you can have stack and stuff like that. So like I said, navigation, you should think of them as UI plus functionality, right? So this UI, this bottom tab is coming from Tab Navigator. So you can actually, okay, before doing that, let me just show you drawer once, right? So before doing this, I'll just show you drawer navigation. Import drawer, drawer, drawer navigator, navigator. So if I show drawer navigator, yeah. So this is how it comes. Again, very simple drawer navigator, nothing is the same thing. I have created a drawer navigator and I have registered my screens. Right? So since I have two screens, I can register them. So if I click on notification, I go to notification. I click on settings, I go to settings. That's it. Same thing, you can get rid of this with headers on false and stuff like that. But yeah, this is how you would set up your drawer navigator. Cool. Any issues in stack, tab, or drawer? So just one last thing and then we'll wrap this up. Okay, so the last thing I would like to show is you can nest navigators. So when you think of the stack, tab, and drawer, right, you should think of them as UI plus functionality. So though that UI part is there and functionality part is there, but since this is basically a React component at this point, so you can nest them. So you can have tab inside of stack, you can have stack inside of tab, and stuff like that. So if you do that, that also works. So let me just show you a basic example. So let's suppose I have a stack navigator, right? Stack navigator, and inside this stack navigator, I import my let's say tab navigator, right? So in the home, instead of rendering the home screen, what I'll do is I'll render the tab navigator. Okay, and let me just reload this app. So yeah, now you can see. Yeah, so found screens is the same nested inside one another. So this is basically an issue because I've made the name of this should actually be home tab. If I do this and reload, yeah, okay, where did this go? Okay, the home tab. Okay, so initial route name was home, so that's why it couldn't find anything. So the first thing it found was notification, so that was rendered. So if I'm putting home tab now and reloading, it should show me the bottom tab. Yeah, cool. right? So now what I've done is I have a stack navigator. Inside that I have a tab navigator. So tab navigator gave me this UI, and stack is working as it is. So if I go to settings, it's still there. Okay, yeah. Why? Because this setting is also registered inside your tab. Like it is registered, right? So if I go to like tab navigator and home, so if I instead of going to settings, I go to notification. Notification. Sorry. Yeah. So now you can see that tab navigator hid away. Correct. So what happens is, like I said, stack comes always on top of the screen, right? So what happens here is, oh my God, not again. Okay. Uh, so what happened here? So to understand this, just go back to the basics. What I said was, tab gives you that bottom two navigators, and stack puts screen on top, right? So when you have basically, I have nested, right? Nested a tab inside of stack. This is what I've done over here, right? So I've rendered the tab navigator on the bottom, and then I'm going to other screens. So as long as I am on the home tab, right, the bottom tab navigator would show. Right. Actually, this setting screen should not be here because it is already registered in Tab Navigator. Tab Navigator has a setting screen, right? So since it is registered there, I do not need to have it here, right? Now, whenever I am on the Home tab, it will render this Tab Navigator, correct? And on the Tab Navigator, by default, what I'm rendering Home. So you got that Home, right? Now, what's happening is when I'm going to some other screen, notification. On the notification screen, what am I rendering? I'm rendering the notification screen. That bottom tab was coming from this tab navigator. Since this is not rendered, I do not get that bottom tab. Simple, right? So I hope this all makes sense. So you can nest and like this is usually how you nest navigation and stuff like that. So this is something I think you should play around so you get a firm grasp on how it works. And yeah, that's pretty much it from my side. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Uh, okay, so one last thing. So I'll just share my screen again. So what's left is basically uh, if you practice all of this right now, you can effectively build applications. What I have left is basically advanced stuff. So what exactly comes inside of them is there is notification, like deep linking. How do you trigger notification? Like there are two type of notification. One is local, which you trigger from the device itself, and one is through push notification that is triggered by something like Firebase or Apple push notification, stuff like that. So these are two type of notification. You should know how and what to use when. How do you link notification to particular screens? So all of this is like I have covered them in a different, basically, what do you say, in a different session. So if you want, you can go, you can look in that session. Other thing that I have left is code push animations. Code push is basically very something that is only available to React native. Like it is not available for native apps. Like you can't do code push in Java, Kotlin, Objective C, Swift. It is there for React Native. The logic being you can update JavaScript code without updating the APK, right? So this is what the logic is. Uh, yeah, and another thing you can try out is animations. Animations are something I've not covered, and apart from that, I think yeah, these are two three things. You can also learn about bare React Native. So what I've covered is mostly with Expo. So with Expo, you basically have a lot of what do you say? You're basically shielded from a lot of headache of setting up Java iOS files. So you don't write code in them, but what you do is basically you go and update those .java Objective C files, right? So that is something that is shielded from you when you're using Expo. If you use bare React Native, this is something you would have to do. So you can try that too, but the logic remains same. The only thing is you need to have whenever you install extra libraries or something, you need to do some 2 3 extra setup. Now, why would you learn like React Native if there is Expo? The reason being, a lot of companies are not using Expo; they use React Native. So if you know how to link basically code from React Native to Pod and like the native iOS, a lot of stuff is now actually being done by React Native. It does auto linking and stuff like that, but you still need to know a bit of how do you link and stuff like that. So that is something you could try. So these are basically 3 4 major things you should, if you have time, you should definitely explore. I would recommend going in the order that I've set. So I'll share my slides too. So the last slide is something what. Okay, I'll just. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, the last slide is what I have left. So you can explore that if you have enough time. But for now, what I have taught you is enough to build a production level application.
Right, folks. So take a look at the last slide that mentions some of the next steps. So you can explore notifications, code push animations. If you get any doubts, if you get stuck in any of those topics, just drop us a mail and we will see if we can talk something about that as well. So yeah, thank you for joining this mini series on React Native, and thank you, Himanshu, for walking us through patiently with live demos on all the major demos. Cool, folks. Thanks for joining in. Have a good rest of the Sunday. Bye bye.